Today is Monday of Holy Week, and in the Diocese of Manchester, this is the day when we have our service of renewal of vows. When we think about what ordination means, what it means to be a priest, to serve God and his people. Today's reading is about Mary of Bethany when she anoints the feet of Jesus. And as we think about service, I wonder, how did Mary of Bethany serve Jesus? When we think about the home of Lazarus and Martha and Mary, it's usually Martha that we think of as serving Jesus. And yes, she is the busy one who takes very seriously her duties of hospitality. And yes, once again, we find Mary not helping Martha, but sitting at the feet of Jesus. But I believe that Mary did serve Jesus, just in a different way. In the Old Testament, prophets were often told to act out their prophecies. Hosea was told to marry the unfaithful Gomer as a prophetic act of the way the people of God would be unfaithful to him. Jeremiah was told to break a clay jar to show how God's people would be broken. Their actions had symbolic meaning. And the action of Mary as she anointed the feet of Jesus, that was a prophetic act. It happened 6 days before the Passover, which means it was 5 days before the crucifixion. And Jesus said that Mary had kept this perfume for the day of his burial. And so this was like an enacted prophecy. But more than that, I believe it was a prophecy of the eternal kingship of Jesus. Many of you will have heard me say before how in the time of Jesus, kings were not crowned, but they had their heads anointed on the day of installation. And when they went on their procession, people would be alerted to the approaching king because the aroma was so strong it would go before them and herald their arrival. The perfume that Mary used was pure perfume. So it would have been so strong and it would have lasted for days and days and days. So as Jesus went into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and even as he stood before Pilate, who asked if he was a king, and even as his feet were nailed to the cross, there would have been that kingly aroma. And yes, most kings were anointed on their head, where Jesus was anointed on his feet. But this reminds me of another biblical passage, one which gives rise to a saying that we still use today. Because when we talk about someone having feet of clay, we mean that despite outward appearances and maybe many successful acts, they would eventually come crashing down because what they were based on was not strong. Many a biblical king was like that. Their heads were anointed, but their feet of clay, would cause them to fall. When Jesus went to the cross, his head was not anointed. In fact, he wore a crown of thorns. And to all looking on, it seemed as though he had failed, as though he had finally come crashing down. But his feet, which would have been nearest to the Roman soldier who stood beneath the cross, his feet would have smelled like the feet of a king. And these feet were no feet of clay. Jesus would rise up to be King of Kings. He would stand firm. King of Kings. I mentioned earlier how Hosea married the unfaithful Gomer. But what I didn't say was that he was to stay faithful to her as an enacted prophecy of how God would, through love, win his people back into a right relationship with him. He would love them back into that relationship. And as the kingly feet of Jesus were nailed to the cross, far from having failed, through the actions of Jesus, God loved his people back into a right relationship with him. Amen.